Welcome back to today's bonus video. This is actually in response to a couple of clips that were sent to me out on our Facebook page, T2 Politics. They wanted to know my thoughts. There's two clips from The View, and we're going to go ahead and get those thoughts right now. So, over on our Facebook page, I was given two clips from The View, and the viewer really wanted my response and my thoughts on it. So here I am. I'm going to go ahead and do this. And if you have any news articles or video clips that you want my thoughts on, go ahead and send them over to our T2 Politics page. I may do a video response, or we'll carry on the conversation over there or down in the comments below. So the first of the videos that was sent to me was a interview that Ivanka Trump recently gave, where she said that she was against the family separation and that was a real low point for her in her career, where the families were being separated at the border. And then The View kind of went back and forth, and really what the gist of what they were saying was, if she disagrees with this, and everybody should disagree with this, that she should just quit. And that she obviously is not influencing her father, so therefore she should quit. And I have a real problem with that just in general. If you disagree with Trump, even if you don't think he's listening to her, wouldn't you want that moderating influence? Wouldn't you want somebody in his ear at least saying, hey, we shouldn't now do this? But the whole immigration thing is actually going to lead into the second video, which was when Trump called the press the enemy of the people, or he's actually calling the fake news the enemy of the people. And really where this is coming from, it's all kind of linked. So we'll go and discuss really what happened in that immigration debate. In the family separation, if you looked at the news, this kind of all started out with a man who posted a couple of pages of two kids sitting in a dog kennel, basically saying that these kids were separated from their families from Trump, and they're basically living in dog kennels in a warehouse, and they had, these thermal kind of tinfoil blankets over them. Now, this is where Trump says this is where the fake news comes in, because both of those pictures were taken when President Obama was president, but they were attributed to President Trump. And they were made it out like this was all President Trump's policy based on a zero tolerance policy that was given out a little bit ago. But that really wasn't the case. The family separation. So this really goes back to, when did this happen? And it all comes from a 2016 case and really a policy that was put in under President Clinton to kind of stop the flow of illegal immigration, because this has been a problem for over 30 years in the United States now, since President Ronald Reagan, and they did the amnesty, and this was supposed to fix all these problems. But what ended up happening was that they passed a bill that separated families back in the 90s, and then it ended up being upheld by the Ninth Circuit Appeals Court. And what it said was that when you cross the border illegally into the United States, you are breaking a federal law and you are going to jail. I know it's a detention facility on the border, but it is considered federal prison. And what the court was ruling was that children cannot be allowed to be put into prison with their parents, just like any prison in the United States. If I go out and I run over 3 people, or I murder somebody, or I steal from a bank, and I go to prison, they are not going to let me take my kids with me to prison. And the courts were saying this is equivalent, that if you are breaking the law, crossing into this country illegally, that your children cannot be held with you in prison. So that they were then sent to camps. And the pictures that were taken from this were from under President Obama, but it was a transfer facility, because they were working, since this was a new policy, they had to create the facilities and the beds and everything that was going. And then later on, Melania Trump went to go visit one of these facilities. And if you watch the interview and the walkthrough, it really looks like a school and kind of not really a day camp, but it kind of looks like a school where people stay and they have classrooms and teachers. And you can really see a lot of the people that work for border customs there, they have children of their own, and they're not. Although anytime you're stuck in a government system, nothing's really going right with your life. It's literally better than being in jail, even though you are separated from your parents. That's got to be such a hard thing on these children. I'm not trying to make light of what these children are going through or even what their parents are going through in these cases. I'm sure it's horrific. If anybody separated me from my kids, I would be devastated. But this was not really Trump's policy, other than he said to enforce the laws that were already on the books. This goes back to Congress not doing their job. And this is where the media kind of gave this false narrative that Trump created this policy to separate kids from their parents just because he's a mean guy who doesn't care. And you get this Time magazine cover that kind of kicked things off even more after the original pictures of the kids in dog kennels being attributed to Trump when the pictures weren't even taken when Trump was even running for president yet. So you get this cover of this little girl with Trump staring down at her. They removed the background and they superimposed Trump in there. And we ended up learning the story later, which there was no correction by Time magazine. Nobody at Time magazine explained it or even apologized for this. And this is where Trump comes out and says, these are the enemy of the people. That you are literally lying to the people to try to make Trump look bad when this is not the case at all. So the courts and previous presidents set this policy in, and Trump says, I'm an administrator. I do not pass laws. I have to enforce laws. So he goes to enforce the laws on the book because they're bad laws and people aren't going to like them. And that Abraham Lincoln once had a famous quote: the best way to get rid of a bad law is to enforce it, because then people will become outraged and then they would demand change. I really feel like this is what Trump was trying to do in this case. He was trying to enforce bad laws so that it would force Congress to enact change. So what the press did in response was to blame everything on Trump. And so he goes over and he says, you guys are the fake news. You're the enemy of the people because you're lying to the people. You are propagandizing people. And these are what both of these videos had to do with. And the press is continuously doing this. If you look at the news coverage of President Trump in the United States, it is over 90% negative on most networks other than Fox News, which is running at about 55% positive. So what was the actual story with the little girl crying on Time magazine's cover was that her mom ran away at 6 o'clock in the morning. Her father had a good job. She left her other 3 kids at home. She crossed Mexico illegally, got to the United States at 11 o'clock at night, and then was picked up by Border Patrol with a photographer nearby. Border Patrol went over and started interviewing the mother and said that they had to search her, and they asked her to put down her child. It was 11 o'clock at night. They had just got done crossing a desert. She put down her child. The child started crying, and this is when the picture was taken. The search was done. The mother picked up the child, and then they were taken to the detention facility together. They weren't even separated, where they were given food and water, and where she claimed asylum. And then the father, who had not heard anything from weeks from his wife and his daughter, had no idea where they went, and other 3 kids at home. And he's a captain of a boat at a port and apparently has a very good job. And what she did was she lied on her asylum application to get into the United States, saying that she was a political dissident and that she was a political activist and being targeted by the government, when it turned out none of that was true. She was actually just running away from her husband and only took away 1 kid. None of that was told in the story. And what they did was they took this little kid, took out the background, took out the story, put Trump staring down at her from another photo that they had of Trump, and this became an entire media narrative for weeks. They hit 11. So Trump, in response to this, actually broke the law. He issued a executive order saying that you cannot separate families from their parent, or children from their parents at the border. And the same people who were crying for him to stop and that he was a mean man and attorney generals in multiple states then turned around and sued President Trump in federal court, saying that it was illegal for him to stop this. And then the courts overturned it. So families are still being separated. The news is still going on about it. Everybody's crying that Trump is separating families at the border, when in reality, it was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that put this into place. And what kept it in place was the same people crying and going again and yelling that this is all Trump's fault, went and sued him, saying that he had to separate these families. And this is all for political points. This is how things are working in this country. Nobody is even talking about this anymore. And if you even bring it up, they'll just say, well, that's not the case, or that families shouldn't be separated. This is above political matters, when it is all about politics. Trump broke the law when he issued this executive order. He does not have the constitutional authority to overrule the courts, and he does not have the constitutional authority to go against laws that are put in by Congress. He did it anyway. He exceeded his authority, and then he gets sued by California, New York, and other liberal states to force him to continue separating families, also that they can score some political points against President Trump. And this is why Trump runs around now, and he's calling these people the fake news, and that they're the enemies of the people, because we are literally being propagandized by multiple networks and newspapers in this country. And while they're trying to tell us that they're the truth and that President Trump is lying about everything and this is all Trump's fault, if you actually go look into the history of the matter and the laws of the matter, this is not Trump's fault. And right now, families are being separated at the border literally because of states like New York and California, Democrat governors and the resistance, they call themselves, that they resist anything that Trump does. So when Trump says, let's not separate families at the border, instead of saying, okay, we'll let them get away with this one, they sue him. Now we got to separate families at the border again. And then they run around on the news saying how awful this is. So this is kind of how the game's played. And these are things that upset Trump supporters. So then Trump supporters run out and say CNN sucks, and that the Democrat sucks, and it polarizes us, because the Trump supporters who are starting to look into this are seeing that everything they are literally being told in 5 major news networks and papers is everything of it is a lie. And they're just trying to drum up support to be anti-Trump. So these are my thoughts on it. If you disagree, go ahead and put it down in the comments. If you agree, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, subscribe to the page. And if you want to get my thoughts on anything that you've seen or you disagree and maybe something I'm missing, go ahead to our T2 Politics page over at Facebook. A link will be in the description, and we can continue the discussion anywhere you like.